The first anomaly appeared at 37,000 feet over the Nevada desert, where the sky should have been empty, except for the dying light of another training exercise. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Viper Chen squinted through his F-22 Raptor's canopy, watching an impossible sight unfold against the amber horizon. A single aircraft held position in restricted airspace, its silhouette too small, too obsolete to belong in the same sky as his fifth-generation fighter jet. Control, this is Viper 1. I have visual on unidentified aircraft, bearing 270, altitude 37,000, requesting immediate identification. His voice carried the practiced authority of 12 years in the cockpit, but something about the craft below sent an unfamiliar chill down his spine. The radio crackled with static before the tower's response. Viper 1, negative contact on radar. Repeat, we show no aircraft in your vicinity. Chen's eyes narrowed as he banked left, bringing the mysterious aircraft into clearer view. The plane was ancient by modern standards, a weathered A-10 Thunderbolt II, its twin engines trailing faint exhaust plumes against the darkening sky. But A-10s weren't supposed to reach this altitude, and this one moved with an eerie precision that defied its reputation as a lumbering ground attack aircraft. Control, I'm looking right at it. Single engine. No, wait. He paused, recalibrating his assessment. Twin engine, straight wings, looks like a warthog, but something's off about the configuration. More static, then a different voice, colder, more official. Viper 1, you are ordered to maintain current heading and altitude. Do not engage unknown contact. That's when Chen noticed the markings. Even from his elevated position, he could make out unusual insignia painted on the aircraft's wings. Not standard Air Force roundels, but something that looked almost like an eye, staring back at him through the gathering darkness. The symbol triggered a memory, something from briefings about classified operations, but the details remained frustratingly out of reach. The strange aircraft began a slow turn, revealing its profile more clearly. Chen's breath caught as he recognized modifications that shouldn't exist: extended wing tanks, unusual antenna arrays, and what appeared to be sophisticated electronic warfare pods mounted beneath the fuselage. This wasn't just any A-10. It was something else entirely, something that had been extensively modified for purposes he couldn't begin to guess. Control, requesting permission to close and identify. This aircraft is displaying non-standard modifications and unknown insignia. The response came immediately, sharp and final. Negative, Viper 1. Return to base immediately. This is not a request. But Chen couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something significant, something that would change everything he thought he knew about the sky above Nevada. Captain Elena, Mirage. Vasquez felt the familiar weight of skeptical eyes as she entered the briefing room at Nelly's Air Force Base. 3 years had passed since Operation Mirage, but the whispers followed her like contrails in a clear sky. The other pilots, all men, all younger, all convinced they understood combat better than the woman who'd earned her call sign in circumstances none of them could imagine, barely looked up from their pre-flight checklists. "Morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that came from surviving missions that existed only in classified files. The response was a collection of nods and muttered acknowledgments, nothing more. She'd grown accustomed to this reception, though it still stung after all these years. Major Rick "Bulldog" Harrison, the squadron's self-appointed alpha, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Mirage, heard you're getting the old bird today. Hope you remember how to fly something that doesn't have all the fancy computer aids." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The old bird was her A-10, a aircraft she'd flown through hell and back during a mission that officially never happened. The others saw it as a punishment detail, a step down from the sleek fighters they piloted. They didn't understand that she'd requested this assignment, that she needed to be back in the cockpit of the machine that had saved her life, and the lives of others in ways she couldn't discuss. "I'll manage," she replied, pulling her flight suit from her locker with practiced efficiency. The fabric still bore the faint outline where her Operation Mirage patch had been removed, leaving only a slightly darker rectangle of material as evidence of her most significant mission. Lieutenant Tommy "Hotshot" Brooks, fresh from flight school and eager to prove himself, couldn't resist adding his voice to the conversation. "At least it's got thick armor. Might need it if you run into any of those mysterious aircraft everyone's been talking about." The room fell silent. Elena's hands stilled on her flight suit zipper, and for a moment the only sound was the distant rumble of jets on the runway. The other pilots exchanged glances, suddenly aware they'd touched on something they didn't understand. "What mysterious aircraft?" Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral. Hotshot, oblivious to the tension he'd created, launched into his account. Some F-22 pilot reported seeing a modified A-10 at impossible altitude yesterday. Command's being real quiet about it, but word is it had some kind of weird markings, like an eye or something. Elena's blood ran cold. The eye marking. She knew that symbol, had worn it on her sleeve for 6 months during the darkest period of her military career. Operation Mirage had been declared concluded, all aircraft accounted for, all personnel debriefed and sworn to secrecy. But if someone had spotted an A-10 with that marking, "Probably just heat mirages," she managed to say, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. The morning sky stretched endlessly above Nelly's as Elena completed her pre-flight inspection. her hands moving with the automatic precision of thousands of hours in the cockpit. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, tail number 810988, sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its shark-mouth nose art grinning in the early sunlight. This wasn't just any warthog. It was her warthog, the aircraft that had carried her through the classified nightmare of Operation Mirage 3 years ago. She ran her fingers along the leading edge of the port wing, feeling for any imperfections that might compromise flight safety. The metal was warm under her touch, and for a moment she was transported back to another desert, another mission, another life entirely. The wing had been repaired after that final mission. You could barely see the patchwork where shrapnel had torn through the aluminum skin during their desperate escape from the valley that didn't exist on any map. "Morning, ma'am." Senior Airman David Rodriguez, her crew chief, approached with a clipboard full of maintenance reports. Unlike the pilots, Rodriguez had been with her during the worst of it, had seen what she could do when everything went wrong and the only option was to keep flying. His respect was genuine, earned through shared terror and triumph. "How's she looking, Rodriguez?" Elena asked, accepting the clipboard and scanning the maintenance logs. Every system showed green, every component within operational parameters. The aircraft was ready, but the question that haunted her was, ready for what? "Like she's ready to show these hotshots what real flying looks like," Rodriguez replied with a grin. "Engines are purring, weapons systems are calibrated, and I've triple-checked the electronic warfare suite. She's as ready as she'll ever be." Elena nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The electronic warfare suite, that was the modification that set her aircraft apart from standard A-10s. The classified equipment that had made Operation Mirage possible, the technology that had allowed her to penetrate enemy air defenses that should have been impenetrable. If another aircraft with those modifications was flying around Nevada, it meant someone had either stolen classified technology or Operation Mirage had left loose ends that were now coming back to haunt them. She climbed into the cockpit, settling into the familiar embrace of the ejection seat. The instrument panel came alive as she ran through the startup sequence, each switch and dial a familiar friend. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and she felt the aircraft come alive beneath her. "Nellie's Tower, this is Mirage 1. Requesting taxi clearance for Training Area 7, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her thoughts. "Mirage 1, cleared to taxi runway 03 left. Winds are light and variable, visibility unlimited. Have a good flight, Captain." As she taxied toward the runway, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this routine training mission was about to become anything but routine. The Nevada desert stretched below like a vast canvas of brown and gold, broken only by the occasional mountain range that rose like sleeping giants from the valley floors. Elena had climbed to 15,000 feet, well below the altitude where yesterday's mysterious sighting had occurred, but still high enough to give her a commanding view of the training area. The A-10 flew with the steady confidence of a machine built to survive, its twin engines providing a reassuring rumble that she felt in her bones. Mirage 1, this is Nellie's control. We have traffic in your area, F-22 flight conducting high-altitude intercept training. Maintain current altitude and heading. Elena acknowledged the transmission, but something in the controller's tone made her more alert. She'd heard that same carefully neutral voice during classified missions, when controllers were managing situations they couldn't discuss over open radio frequencies. Her eyes swept the sky above, searching for the telltale contrails that would mark the presence of the Raptors. She found them at 35,000 feet, two white lines scratched across the deep blue sky like chalk marks on a blackboard. The F-22s were flying a standard combat air patrol pattern, but their positioning seemed oddly focused on her general area. Elena had flown enough joint operations to recognize when she was being watched, and every instinct honed by years of combat told her she was currently under very close scrutiny. Mirage 1, be advised we're receiving reports of unusual radar contacts in your vicinity. Recommend you maintain heightened awareness. The transmission came from a different controller, one whose voice she didn't recognize. Elena's training kicked in automatically when control started using phrases like unusual radar contacts. It meant something was happening that they couldn't or wouldn't discuss over standard radio channels. She adjusted her radar scope, switching to air-to-air mode and conducting a systematic sweep of the surrounding airspace. The F-22s showed up as intermittent contacts. Their stealth technology made them hard to track even with her upgraded systems. But there was something else, something that appeared and disappeared at the edge of her radar's range like a ghost in the machine. Control, this is Mirage 1. I'm showing intermittent contact bearing 045, range approximately 50 miles. Can you confirm? The pause before the response lasted long enough to make Elena's pulse quicken. Mirage 1, we show no traffic in that area. Continue your mission as planned. But Elena knew what she was seeing. The radar signature was faint but distinctive, another A-10, flying at an altitude that should have been impossible for the aircraft type. More importantly, the electronic emissions she was detecting through her classified sensors matched the signature of only one aircraft she knew, the prototype that had been lost during the final mission of Operation Mirage. Her hands tightened on the controls as the implications hit her. If that aircraft was still flying, it meant someone had survived the mission that had officially claimed no survivors. And if they were out there, They were operating without authorization, using classified technology for purposes she couldn't begin to guess. The decision to investigate wasn't really a decision at all. It was the same instinct that had kept her alive during the darkest days of her career, the same drive that had made her request assignment back to the A-10, despite the damage it had done to her reputation. She had to know who was flying that aircraft and what they were doing in the skis above Nevada. Alina began a subtle climb, using the A-10's surprising high-altitude capabilities to close the distance to the mysterious contact. The aircraft responded eagerly, as if it too remembered the urgency of classified missions and the importance of questions that had no easy answers. At 25,000 feet, the A-10 was operating well above its normal envelope, but the modified engines and aerodynamic improvements installed during Operation Mirage made the impossible routine. Alina felt the familiar thrill of pushing boundaries, of flying an aircraft that officially didn't exist in the configuration she was piloting. The thin air made the controls feel different, more responsive in some ways, requiring constant attention to maintain stable flight. She was closing on the mysterious radar contact when her threat warning system exploded into life. The distinctive tone that indicated radar lock-on filled her headset, and she immediately went into evasive maneuvers, rolling the A-10 into a diving turn that stressed the airframe to its limits. Someone was painting her with targeting radar, and they were doing it with equipment sophisticated enough to burn through her electronic countermeasures. Mirage 1, this is Viper 1. I have you on radar at 25,000. That's pretty high for a warthog. The voice was crisp, professional, but carried an undertone of suspicion that made Alina's blood run cold. She leveled out at 20,000 feet, her heart pounding as she processed the implications. The F-22 pilot had been watching her climb, had seen her exceed the A-10's supposed performance limitations. More importantly, he'd used targeting radar to lock onto her, a hostile act that suggested he considered her a potential threat. Viper 1, this is Mirage 1. I'm conducting authorized training operations in this area. Please confirm your intentions. The response came immediately, and it wasn't what she expected. Mirage 1, I need you to explain how you achieved that altitude and why your aircraft is showing electronic signatures that don't match standard A-10 configurations. I'm also going to need you to explain those markings on your wings. Alina's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on finding the other aircraft that she'd forgotten about her own modifications, the classified equipment that set her A-10 apart from every other aircraft in the Air Force inventory. The markings he was referring to were the faded remains of the Operation Mirage insignia, barely visible to the naked eye, but apparently clear enough to spot from an F-22's sophisticated optics. Viper 1, I'm not sure what you're referring to. I'm flying a standard A-10 configuration on routine training. The lie came easily, but she knew it wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. The F-22 pilot had seen too much, and he was asking the right questions. Mirage 1, I need you to understand that I've been briefed on unusual aircraft operating in this area. Your aircraft matches the description of a contact reported yesterday. I'm going to need you to follow me to a designated landing area for inspection. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Alina knew that if she landed and allowed her aircraft to be inspected, the classified modifications would be discovered. Questions would be asked that she couldn't answer, and the carefully constructed fiction that Operation Mirage had ended with all aircraft accounted for would unravel. But the alternative was worse. If she refused to comply, the F-22 pilot would be forced to treat her as a hostile contact. And while the A-10 was tough, it wasn't tough enough to survive a confrontation with a fifth-generation fighter jet at altitude. The radio crackled with tension as Alina weighed her options, each one worse than the last. Above her, the F-22 maintained its position, waiting for her response. Below, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, offering no sanctuary from the impossible situation she found herself in. Viper 1 I, Alina began, then stopped. On the edge of her radar scope, the ghost contact was moving again, and this time it was heading directly toward them. The radar contact materialized from the electronic fog like an apparition given form, its signature growing stronger as it closed the distance between them. Alina watched her scope with growing disbelief as the contact resolved into something that defied explanation. An aircraft flying at 40,000 feet, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of an A-10, but operating in an environment where no A-10 should be able to survive. Viper 1, are you seeing this? Alina transmitted, her voice tight with controlled tension. Above her, Lieutenant Colonel Chen had gone silent, his F-22 maintaining its position but no longer pressing for her compliance. Alina could imagine him staring at his own radar display, trying to process what he was seeing. The contact was approaching from the northeast, flying a direct intercept course that would bring it into visual range within minutes. Mirage 1, I'm tracking the contact. Control, this is Viper 1. I have two A-10s in my area, both operating at altitudes that should be impossible for that aircraft type, requesting immediate support and guidance. The response from Control came in a different voice, one that carried the unmistakable authority of someone far up the chain of command. Viper 1, Mirage 1, this is Blackbird Control. You are both ordered to maintain current positions and observe only. Do not attempt to intercept or engage the unknown contact. Repeat, observe only. Alina's blood ran cold. Blackbird Control was the call sign used for the most classified operations, the ones that didn't officially exist. The fact that they were monitoring this frequency meant that someone had been expecting this encounter, had perhaps even orchestrated it. The question was why. The unknown aircraft continued its approach, now close enough that Alina could begin to make out its configuration through her telescopic sight. It was indeed an A-10, but one that had been modified far beyond anything in the standard Air Force inventory. The wings had been extended, additional fuel tanks mounted beneath the fuselage, and the entire aircraft seemed to shimmer with a heat mirage effect that made it difficult to focus on. Jesus Christ, Chen's voice came over the radio, tight with disbelief. I can see it now. That's not possible. A-10s don't fly at that altitude, and they sure as hell don't move like that. Alina knew what he was seeing because she'd seen it before. 3 years ago during the classified test flights that had preceded Operation Mirage. The aircraft approaching them was the prototype, the one that had been lost during the final mission. But if it was still flying, it meant someone had survived the crash that had supposedly killed the entire test crew. The prototype leveled out at 38,000 feet, close enough now that Alina could make out the details that had haunted her dreams for 3 years. The nose art was different, where her aircraft bore the grinning shark mouth. This one displayed a more sinister design, a stylized eye that seemed to track their movements. The same eye that had appeared on all the Operation Mirage aircraft, the symbol that had become synonymous with missions that crossed the line between possible and impossible. Mirage 1, this is Ghost 6. The voice that came over the radio was distorted, processed through encryption algorithms that made it sound more machine than human. But Alina recognized something in the cadence, something that made her heart skip a beat. Ghost 6, identify yourself and state your intentions, Alina replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her thoughts. You know who I am, Mirage. The question is, are you ready to learn what really happened during Operation Mirage? Are you ready to know why they told you we were all dead? The transmission cut off, leaving Alina staring at the aircraft that shouldn't exist, flown by a pilot who should have died 3 years ago. Above her, the F-22 pilot was demanding answers she couldn't give, and below, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, keeping its secrets buried beneath miles of sand and stone. Alina's hands trembled on the controls as recognition hit her like a physical blow. The voice, despite the electronic distortion, belonged to someone she'd thought was dead, someone whose death had been the final, devastating blow that had ended Operation Mirage and shattered her faith in everything she'd believed about her mission and her country. Marcus, she whispered into her microphone, using the name she'd never expected to speak again. The response came immediately, confirming her worst fears and deepest hopes. Hello, Alina. It's been a long time. I see you're still flying the old girl. She looks good considering what we put her through. Major Marcus, Phantom, Delacroix, her former squadron mate, her closest friend during the dark days of Operation Mirage, and the man whose supposed death had driven her to request the investigation that had ultimately led to her effective exile to routine training missions. The official report had stated that his aircraft had been shot down over hostile territory, that there had been no survivors, no recoverable remains. Alina had attended his memorial service, had watched his wife receive the folded flag, had carried the guilt of his loss for 3 years. Marcus, what the hell is going on? You're supposed to be dead. We held a service. Sarah got the flag. Your name is on the memorial wall. Sarah remarried 6 months ago, Marcus replied, his voice carrying a bitter edge that cut through the electronic distortion. She's living in Colorado now, has a new baby. Turns out it's easier to mourn a dead hero than wait for a missing one. Above them, Chen's voice cut through the growing tension. Mirage 1, I need you to explain what's happening here. Who is Ghost 6, and why are you talking like you know each other? Alina ignored the F-22 pilot's questions. Her attention focused entirely on the impossible aircraft flying parallel to her position. Marcus, where have you been? What happened to you during the final mission? What happened to me? I completed the mission, Alina. I delivered the package, eliminated the target, and extracted under fire. The only problem was when I got back to base, I found out that Operation Mirage had officially ended 3 days earlier. According to the records, my aircraft had been shot down, I was dead, and the mission I just completed had never been authorized. The implications hit Alina like a series of hammer blows. If Marcus had completed a mission that had never been authorized, it meant someone had been operating outside the official chain of command. It meant Operation Mirage had been larger, more complex, and more dangerous than any of them had realized. I tried to come back, Marcus continued, his voice growing more bitter with each word. I tried to contact our handlers, tried to report in through official channels, but every time I made contact, I was told that Major Marcus Delacroix was dead, that any claims to the contrary were security threats that would be dealt with accordingly. Alina's mind raced as she processed what he was telling her. Someone had declared Marcus dead while he was still alive, had erased his existence from the official records while he was still carrying out missions in their name. The question was, who had the power to make such a decision, and why they'd chosen to do it. So I stayed dead, Marcus concluded. I kept flying, kept the aircraft operational, kept carrying out missions for people who insist I don't exist. 3 years, Alina. 3 years of being a ghost in a machine that officially doesn't exist. The radio fell silent except for the steady hum of engines and the distant chatter of air traffic control. Elena stared at the aircraft that held her supposedly dead friend, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd learned. Operation Mirage hadn't ended. It had simply gone deeper underground, operating with pilots who'd been officially erased from existence. Elena's mind reeled as she tried to process the implications of Marcus's revelation. If he'd been conducting unauthorized missions for 3 years, using classified technology and operating under the cover of official death, then Operation Mirage was far more than the experimental program she'd believed it to be. It was an ongoing black operation, one that had deemed her friend too dangerous to exist in the official world. Marcus, who's been giving you orders, who's been running missions that officially don't exist. The pause before his response stretched long enough to make Elena nervous. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he'd been wrestling with the same questions for 3 years. That's where it gets complicated, Elena. The orders come through the same channels they always did during Operation Mirage: encrypted frequencies, coded transmissions, authorization codes that check out against classified databases. But when I try to trace them back to their source, I hit walls, digital dead ends, people who don't exist giving orders for missions that never happened. Above them, Chen's voice cut through the conversation with growing urgency. Mirage 1, I need you to explain what's happening here. Control is asking questions I can't answer, and I'm running low on fuel. I need to know if you're both friendly or if I should be treating this as a hostile encounter. Elena looked up through her canopy, spotting the F-22 as a distant speck against the blue sky. Chen was caught in the middle of something he couldn't understand, and his fuel situation meant he'd have to return to base soon. Once he did, the questions would multiply, and the careful secrecy that had kept Marcus alive for 3 years would be shattered. Chen, you need to forget what you've seen here today, Elena transmitted, using his real name instead of his call sign to emphasize the seriousness of what she was saying. This conversation never happened. These aircraft were never here. You saw heat mirages, nothing more. Like hell I did, Chen replied, his voice tight with frustration. I've got two A-10s flying at impossible altitudes, one pilot who's supposed to be dead, and control using classified call signs. I'm not forgetting anything until someone gives me answers. Marcus's voice cut through the argument with the authority of someone who'd been living with impossible situations for 3 years. Viper 1, you're going to forget because the alternative is that you disappear too. The people running this operation don't leave loose ends. They've already demonstrated that with me. The threat was implicit but clear. Elena could see the terrible logic of it. If Marcus had been officially declared dead to keep him under control, The same fate could befall anyone who stumbled onto the truth. The question was whether Chen would understand the danger he was in, or whether his sense of duty would compel him to report what he'd seen. "This is insane," Chen muttered, but Alina could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He was beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into something far beyond his clearance level, something that could destroy his career or worse. "Chen," Alina said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen careers ended and lives ruined by classified operations. "I need you to trust me. Go back to base. File a report that says you saw heat mirages and unusual atmospheric conditions. Nothing more. Your career, your life, maybe even your family's safety depends on it." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Alina could imagine Chen wrestling with the decision, weighing his duty to report against the growing certainty that some truths were too dangerous to reveal. Finally, his voice came over the radio, resigned but determined. "Mirage 1, I'm returning to base. But if I ever see you again, I'm going to want real answers. Not stories about heat mirages and atmospheric conditions. Real answers." Alina watched the F-22 bank away toward Nellie's, its contrail a white line against the desert sky. Chen was gone, but the reprieve was temporary. Soon, there would be questions about his fuel consumption, his flight path, his radio transmissions. The investigation would begin, and eventually it would lead back to her. The weight of 3 years of secrets pressed down on Alina as she watched the F-22 disappear into the distance. She was alone with Marcus now, two ghosts in aircraft that officially didn't exist, carrying the burden of knowledge that could destroy them both. The question was what to do with that knowledge, and whether it was possible to find redemption in a world where the truth was too dangerous to speak. "So what now, Marcus?" Alina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to two dead pilots flying impossible aircraft over a desert that keeps too many secrets?" Marcus's response came after a long pause, and when it did, it carried the weight of 3 years of isolation and the desperate hope of someone who'd found a potential ally in a world that insisted he didn't exist. "Now, Alina, I show you what Operation Mirage really was. And then you decide whether you want to help me stop it, or whether you want to go back to your comfortable lies and pretend this conversation never happened." The two aircraft flew in formation across the Nevada desert, their shadows moving like specters across the sand below. Alina had made her choice the moment she'd heard Marcus's voice, though she wouldn't fully understand the implications until much later. Some secrets were too dangerous to carry alone, and some truths were too important to ignore, no matter the cost. The flight toward the unknown coordinates Marcus had provided took them deeper into the Nevada desert, over terrain that appeared on no civilian maps and was crossed by no commercial air routes. Elena followed the modified A-10 as it descended toward what appeared to be empty wasteland, but her instruments told a different story. The area was saturated with electronic emissions, sophisticated radar signatures, and the unmistakable signs of a major military installation hidden beneath the desert floor. "Welcome to Site 47," Marcus transmitted as they approached what looked like a natural canyon formation. "This is where Operation Mirage really began, and where it's been continuing ever since." As they dropped lower, Elena could see the carefully concealed infrastructure that marked the location as far more than a simple desert canyon. Camouflaged hangar doors were built into the rock faces, sophisticated antenna arrays disguised as natural formations, and what appeared to be a runway carved into the canyon floor and covered with adaptive camouflage that matched the surrounding terrain. "Marcus, this isn't on any map I've ever seen. How is this possible?" "Black budget construction, Elena. The kind of facility that doesn't appear in congressional appropriations or military base listings. It was built during the Cold War as a test site for experimental aircraft, and it's been operating in complete secrecy ever since. Operation Mirage was just the latest in a long line of programs that have used this place to develop capabilities that the public can never know about." Elena's mind raced as she processed the implications. If Site 47 had been operating for decades, it meant there was an entire shadow military structure that existed outside normal oversight. The modified A-10s, the classified missions, the official deaths, all of it was part of a system that had been designed to operate beyond the reach of traditional military authority. "Mirage 1, Ghost 6, this is Site 47 control. You are cleared for landing on runway 09. Ground personnel are standing by for immediate debriefing." The voice that came over the radio was crisp, professional, and entirely unfamiliar. Elena had expected some explanation of who was running the facility, but instead, she was being treated as if her arrival had been expected, planned for, perhaps even orchestrated. "Marcus, who's running this place? Who's been giving you orders?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out for 3 years," Marcus replied as they lined up for their approach. "The orders come from someone with access to the highest levels of military intelligence, someone who knows about operations that are supposed to be compartmentalized beyond any single person's knowledge. But every time I try to trace them back to their source, I hit walls." The landing was routine, despite the unusual circumstances. Elena's A-10 touched down on the hidden runway and rolled to a stop beside a series of camouflaged hangars that looked like they'd been carved directly into the canyon walls. Ground personnel emerged from concealed positions, moving with the efficiency of a well-trained military unit, but wearing no identifying uniforms or insignia. As Elena shut down her engines and prepared to exit the aircraft, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The ground crew was wearing the same eye symbol that had marked the Operation Mirage aircraft, the same insignia that had been painted on Marcus's prototype. Whatever was happening at Site 47, it was directly connected to the classified program that had supposedly ended 3 years ago. Elena, Marcus's voice came over the radio one last time before they shut down their communications. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. Once you leave that cockpit, once you step into that hangar, there's no going back. The people running this operation don't let pilots return to normal duty. They don't let anyone leave who's seen what you're about to see. Elena paused with her hand on the canopy release, the weight of Marcus's words settling over her like a shroud. She thought about her life at Nellie's, the routine training missions, the skeptical looks from her fellow pilots, the comfortable predictability of a career that had been effectively ended by her involvement in Operation Mirage. Then she thought about the 3 years of questions that had haunted her, the official lies that had never quite made sense, and the growing certainty that the truth was more important than her personal safety. I understand, Marcus, but I need to know what really happened to us. I need to know why they told us our friends were dead when they were still alive, and I need to know what we're supposed to do about it. She released the canopy and climbed out of the aircraft, stepping into a world that officially didn't exist, to learn truths that were too dangerous for the official world to acknowledge. The desert air was hot and dry, but Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and whatever she learned in the next few hours would change everything she thought she knew about her service, her country, and herself. The interior of the hangar was a study in contrasts, a cutting-edge technology, seamlessly integrated with rough-hewn rock walls, creating an environment that felt both futuristic and ancient. Elena followed Marcus through a series of security checkpoints, each one more sophisticated than the last, until they finally emerged into a briefing room that looked like something from a science fiction film. The walls were covered with displays showing satellite imagery, flight paths, and mission data that spanned decades. Elena recognized some of the aircraft profiles, experimental jets that had been publicly canceled, stealth designs that had supposedly never moved beyond the drawing board, and modifications to standard aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what was aerodynamically possible. "Welcome to the real Air Force, Captain Vasquez," said a voice from the shadows. Elena turned to see a man in his 50s, wearing a perfectly pressed uniform devoid of any rank insignia or identifying marks. His presence commanded immediate attention, and when he spoke, it was with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You are?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the growing sense that she was in far deeper than she'd ever imagined. "You can call me Control. I'm the one who's been managing operations at this facility for the past 15 years. I'm also the one who's been keeping Major Delacroix alive and operational for the past 3 years, despite the official determination that he died in the line of duty.